Hi, thanks for stopping by to watch me, Leah, cook kosher. Today I want to show you how to make my favorite dessert for the holidays, especially Sukkot. I love sitting in the sukkah with my own personal pan French apple tart. I love the way the apples just swirl across the top, glazed with apricot, and sit on top of a wonderful mash of fresh apples. It's as much fun to make as it is to eat. Let me show you how to do it. Maybe you've seen my other videos where I've illustrated my handy little apple peeler, core, slicer gizmo here. Let me show you how that works if you haven't. Just take an apple, stick it on there, and we crank. And there you go. Peel, cored, and sliced all at once. Now, we're going to be baking these apples to get them sort of mashed up, because that's what's going to go inside our French apple tart. I'm going to spray this so the apples don't stick. Now, most cookbooks will tell you to put a little lemon juice on your apples so they don't turn brown. I'll sprinkle a little bit on. These 3 apples we'll save for our top decoration. Meanwhile, we're back to our tray of apples, and I'm going to sprinkle it with sugar. Oh, and don't forget the recipes at leahcookskosher.com. You can find it there. You don't have to worry about writing everything down right now. Okay, and a little bit of flour, and the cinnamon. And with my hands, I'm just going to toss that. I can break the apples up because we're going to want them sort of mashed up anyway. And we're going to need to bake these in the oven. I think about 375 degrees. It could take 15 minutes, it could take half an hour, depending on your oven. I'm going to cover them with another pan. Saves a little bit on foil. I'll slip it into the oven just like this. Check it maybe after about 10 minutes and see if I need to keep it on. But what I'm going to be looking for is to see how tender my apples are. They're going to want to break up and mash. All right, we'll look at that in a little bit. Meanwhile, into the oven with these. Now, I have a crust in front of me that is homemade, and I pulled it out of the freezer. So go to the recipe archives, leahcookskosher.com, and you'll find our basic super duper easy pie crust. And you can refer to the video to show you how to roll each of the different types of crusts. But today we're going to use this 11.5-inch pan. This one we need to par bake it. We need to bake it a little bit before it goes back into the oven for the final baking after it's been filled. And to ready it for the oven for the first baking, I am going to place a piece of foil, press down in the middle, and gently press outward from the middle to the edges. Now, the reason we're doing this is because we're going to fill it with pie weights. Now, pie weights prevent the crust from puffing up during baking. We want to keep the crust weighted down so that we have room to actually fill it with our apples when we're ready. Now, in the bakery, since we make so many, I don't have a gazillion little baby metal pie weights. We use a lot of beans. Just pour them right in like that and push them around. And I'm going to put this into my oven along with the apples that we've already prepared. And I'm going to bake it for about 10 minutes. What I'm going to be looking for is a light color on this edge. Now that I have the crust in the oven, I just want to follow up and see how my apples are doing. Look at that. What I'm looking for is for my knife to just go in very easily. I'm getting a little resistance, so I'm going to leave that in maybe 5 minutes more. and then we'll check back. While the apples and the crust are in the oven, let's prep our top apples. Now, I'm not using my super duper peeler on that because I want my apples to be very, very thin, and I can't control the thickness of the apple peeler, but I can control it when I'm doing them by hand. And I'm going from top to bottom because I want my apples nice and round on the edges. I can't get away without having one of these in my kitchen. I just use it too much. Very long, thin paring knife. Cut the apples and get the skin straight down on the core and take the rest of that off. I find it pays to be meticulous in this part of the process because ultimately your apple slices will be much easier to use. I'm making very thin slices to the center. I'm not going this up and down. Actually rotating my knife to the center so that I can have nice, even slices out on the outer edge that taper to the core. And I guess you could use a longer knife if you wanted, but so as you can see, by the time I'm done with the 3 apples, I am going to have quite a number of slices. So I'm going to take a quick peek at this crust. That still needs more time. I don't have any color on that yet. And these apples are looking nice and tender. So I'm going to go ahead and bring them to my board, and I'm going to mash them up a little bit. This is what my apples look like. I'm going to break them down a little bit, but I can feel that they are still crunchy. You can hear it. I'm going to use my pastry cutter to even cut these smaller. We don't want mashed apples as much as we want a real fine chopped apple. And now that I've steamed them quite a bit to help them get tender faster, I'm going to go ahead and put them back into the oven for a little bit to get some of the moisture to steam off. I don't want my apples this wet when I put them into my pie crust. Okay? Wow, these apples just smell great. All right. I can tell taking that lid off has helped get some of the moisture off. They're very hot, as you can see. And I'm just going to go ahead and scrape into that bowl. Now I'm going to check my tart shell. Okay, now since we're par baking, that means I'm not trying to bake it all the way. There's a little bit of color, and I'll let it rest for about 5 minutes before I take the beans out. I'm just going to simply lift those beans out and save them for next time. I mean, they're perfectly good, but the way you'll know that you can't use them anymore is they won't have any more weight left in them. They feel hollow. But meanwhile, this is going to sit just a few more minutes and then go back into the oven so that we can give the bottom crust a little bit more browning. Okay. I've pulled my crust out of the oven. It's still hot. So very carefully I'm going to lift it onto the board, mostly so you can see it better. Otherwise you could just work on top right here. But as you can see, there's a faint browning, but not overdone. It is going back into the oven. So that's perfect. Now I'm going to take my apples. They're still a little bit warm, but that's okay. And I'm just going to scoop them into the shell. I'm going to take my apples and working from the outer edge in with what would be the top of the apple, I'm going to go ahead and start placing them on. And as you can see, the outer edge of the apple is going on to the core side. Now I am purposely hanging that edge because the apples will shrink back a little bit. I'm just putting my less than perfect ones in the middle. I'm going to put the points out. They'll be prettier when the tart's done. I don't really think you can mess this up. I mean, it's mashed apples and then apple slices. Pretty straightforward. And it is so impressive, your guests will just ooh and ah. Lay those in to close the circle. Just a few on top. There we go. Okay, how does that look? Now, very, very gently, because you don't want to disturb your apples, we're going to brush on the melted margarine. Remember, you can find the recipes and written instructions on leahcookskosher.com. Now this will bake in the oven. I think I'm going to stick with about 375 degrees. And traditionally, the French apple tart, it does get a little bit blackened on the edges of those apples. So have patience, leave it in there. Okay, and the final thing before it goes in, just a sprinkling of a little bit of sugar. And it could take up to a half an hour. So have patience, and we'll check on it in a little bit. This is beautiful. All right, so when you see these dark edges, don't freak out. It's not burned. This is very hot, so be careful as you do the next step, which is our apricot jam that's been nuked, so it's spreadable. And we're going to apply this as a glaze to those apples. Now you're going to want to do this with a very light hand, you know, romance it. Otherwise the apples will shift. I think that's beautiful. Our tart is still a little bit warm, but I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate how to get it out of the pan, because the ring is separate from the bottom. Okay. Now, you can just take this tart, metal and all, there's a metal base there, and stick it right on your cake plate. You can also later just loosen it up like I did, and it'll come right off. There you have it. A gorgeous French apple tart.